Clara Whitmore set the brass cartridges on the counter one by one, and the whole store went quiet. The shopkeeper stared. So did the women by the window. A bride was supposed to buy lace, sugar, white fabric for a wedding she'd never get. Clara bought salt rope bandages and 40 rounds of ammunition. Then she looked the town dead in the eye. Which trail goes up to Silas Boone's place? They laughed. They'd buried that question with every woman before her. She didn't laugh back. If you're watching, do me a kindness, subscribe. Follow Clara's story all the way to the end and drop the name of the city you're watching from in the comments so I can see how far this story has traveled. Now let's begin. The stagecoach door swung open and dumped Clara Whitmore into the hottest stretch of summer Cedar Hollow had seen in 20 years. She stepped down without taking the driver's hand. Her boots hit the dust, and the dust didn't move too dry, too beaten, just rose up around her ankles like smoke off a dead fire. She straightened her back. Folks were already watching. She could feel it the way you feel a horsefly land between your shoulders. Another one. A woman said, not even bothering to whisper. Lord help her. She won't last the night, said a man on the bench outside the mercantile. He had a toothpick rolling slow between his lips and the lazy confidence of someone who'd watched this play out before. None of 'em do. Clara heard every word. She'd learned a long time ago that the trick wasn't pretending not to hear. The trick was deciding it didn't cost you anything. She walked across the street toward the general store like she had business because she did. The bell over the door rang. Inside it was cooler by maybe 2 degrees and smelled of flour leather and old tobacco. A heavy-set man behind the counter looked up and his eyebrows climbed when he saw her. Help you, miss, ma'am, Clara said. Mrs. come tomorrow, I reckon. The shopkeeper's mouth opened then closed. Word had clearly run ahead of her. You're the one come to marry Boone. That's the arrangement, miss. He caught himself. Ma'am, I'd be doing you wrong if I didn't say something. That man up the mountain ain't right. There's been 4 women before you. 4. Each one come down that trail before the second sunset, white as a sheet, wouldn't say a word about what they saw. One of 'em took the very next coach out and never wrote her own mother again. That's so. That's so. Clara set her small leather case on the counter. Then I'll need supplies, and I'd be obliged if you'd quit telling me things I didn't ask to know. The man blinked. Behind her near the door, 2 women had drifted closer, pretending to inspect a bolt of calico nobody intended to buy. What'll it be then? The shopkeeper said, a little stiff now. Salt, a pound. Rope of the good kind, not that frayed stuff hanging by the window. Bandages all you've got. Carbolic if you keep it. A canteen full. She paused. And cartridges. 44 caliber. The store went still. The shopkeeper's hand halfway to the salt barrel stopped in the air. Cartridges. 40 rounds. 50 if you can spare them. One of the women by the calico made a small sound like a kettle just before it sings. Ma'am, the shopkeeper said slowly. Brides don't generally come in asking for ammunition. Clara looked at him. She had a way of looking at a person that made them feel measured, weighed, and filed away. I'm not generally a... she said. 40 rounds. He counted them out. His hands weren't quite steady. When he was done, he wrapped the lot in brown paper and tied it with string, and the whole time the 2 women by the door watched her like she might catch fire. That'll be $1.60, he said. Clara counted out the coins. Every one of them she'd earned hard, and she set each down like it mattered, because it did. Which trail, she said again, goes up to Boone's place? The shopkeeper wet his lips. You don't want... I didn't ask what I want. I asked which trail. A long pause. Then from behind her, one of the women spoke, older, thin a voice like a dry hinge. East end of town. Past the dead cottonwood. The trail forks at the burned fence post. Take the left, and you'll be at his gate by dark. A beat. If the heat or the snakes don't get you first. Clara turned and looked at her. The woman expected something, a flinch maybe, or a thank you that sounded like a prayer. Clara gave her neither. Obliged, she said, and that was all. She gathered her parcels, tucked them under one arm, and walked back out into the murderous light. Cedar Hollow in summer was a town that had forgotten how to sweat. The river that gave it its name had pulled back to a thin brown thread, and folks talked about it the way they'd talk about a sick relative, quietly and not in front of the children. Every porch had men sitting on it doing nothing, because there was nothing to do. The cattle were thin. The grass was the color of an old bone. And up above all of it, hazy and blue in the heat, stood the mountain. Clara stood at the edge of town and looked up at it for a long moment. Somewhere up there was the man she'd agreed to marry sight unseen. Somewhere up there was the rest of her life, or the end of it. She'd had a life before, a good one or good enough. Head housekeeper at the Larkin Ranch over in Kettle County. 11 years of it, rising from a girl who scrubbed floors to a woman who ran the whole household, kept the books, hired and fired, held the keys. Mr. Larkin had trusted her with everything. Then the barn burned. 80 head of horses, a season's hay, and the main stable gone in one night of orange wind. And when the ash cooled, somebody had to be blamed, because rich men do not lose 80 horses and simply accept it. There was talk of a lamp she'd left burning. Talk of carelessness. Talk that grew teeth the longer the Larkin family's lawyer let it grow, because a guilty housekeeper was a great deal cheaper than an insurance claim, and a great deal less embarrassing than the truth, which was that young Mr. Larkin Jr. had been drunk and smoking in the loft, and Clara had the bad manners to know it. So they let her go without a reference. They let the word arsonist follow her down the road like a stray dog. And by the time it reached the next county, no respectable house would take her on, and no respectable man would have her. That was how a woman of 27 with good sense and steady hands ended up answering a marriage advertisement from a man the whole frontier called mad. She hadn't been desperate. She wanted that understood, even if only to herself. She'd been clear. There was a difference, and she held to it. Clara shifted the parcels under her arm, adjusted the small revolver she wore under her shawl where the town couldn't see it, and started east. Past the dead cottonwood. Past the burned fence post. Left at the fork. The trail went up. The mountain did not want her. She understood that within the first mile. The trail was steep and loose scree, sliding under her boots, the heat coming off the rocks in waves she could see. Twice she stopped to drink, and both times she made herself stop drinking sooner than she wanted to, because a canteen empty at the top of a mountain was a slow way to die, and she had not survived everything else to die stupid. The coyotes started before sundown. That was the thing folks never told you, that they didn't wait for the dark. She heard one yip off to her right, then an answer further up the slope, and the back of her neck went cold despite the heat. She put her hand on the revolver and kept walking. She did not run. Running, she knew, was an invitation. The light went from white to gold, to the color of a bruise. The mountain turned purple. And just as the first real dark settled into the canyons, she came around a bend in the trail and saw it a cabin set back against the rock with a barn beside it, and a corral where 2 horses stood with their heads up watching her. A lamp burned in the cabin window. Clara stopped at the edge of the clearing to catch her breath and her nerve, and that was when she saw the porch. Blood. Fresh. A dark smear across the boards glistening in the last of the light, and a trail of it leading to the door. Every story the town had told her came back at once. He ain't right. 4 women, white as a sheet, wouldn't say a word about what they saw. A wiser woman might have turned around. Clara drew her revolver, thumbed back the hammer, and walked toward the door. She'd buried being afraid the same year she'd buried trusting men who held the keys. Whatever was behind that door, she would meet it the way she'd met everything else, standing up and looking it dead in the eye. She was 3 steps from the porch when the door flew open. The man who filled the doorway was the biggest she'd ever seen, broad as a barn door, dark-bearded, a long rifle held easy across his body, in hands that looked like they could break a green branch without trying. There was blood on his shirt. His eyes found her revolver first, then her face, and something in them changed. Not fear, she'd later think. Something more like weariness, like a man who'd answered this door too many times. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then he spoke, and his voice was low and rough, and carried no mercy at all. "If you came up here looking for a husband," Silas Boone said, "turn around and go back down. If you came up here running from wolves." His eyes flicked just once past her shoulder toward the dark, then step inside and shut the door. Clara did not lower the revolver. Whose blood is that? The question seemed to catch him off guard. The other four, she'd later learn, had screamed, or wept, or simply turned and fled down the dark trail and risked the coyotes rather than stay one more second. Not one of them had asked whose blood it was. Silas's jaw worked. "Not mine," he said. "Not yours neither, unless you make it so." His gaze dropped to her parcels and the brown paper package of cartridges balanced on top, and something flickered across his face that she couldn't read. "You buy those down in town?" "I did." "They laugh at you." "They did." "They tell you I was mad." "They did that too." A muscle moved in his cheek. It might have been the ghost of something. "And you came up anyhow, with a gun and 40 rounds and no wedding dress." He shook his head slowly. "Lady, I don't know if you're the bravest fool I ever met, or the most dangerous." "Reckon that depends," Clara said, "on whose blood is on your porch. You're going to have to tell me, Mr. Boone, because I climbed your mountain in the heat, and I fought your coyotes, and I am not going to stand here in the dark guessing." For a long moment, he just looked at her. And then, from somewhere inside the cabin behind him, came a sound that stopped the breath in Clara's throat. A child's whimper. Quickly muffled. The sound of a small hand clapped over a small mouth. Clara's eyes went from the blood to the man to the dark of the cabin behind him, and the whole shape of the thing shifted in her mind all at once, the way a word in another language suddenly turns to sense. I wasn't blocking the door to keep her out. I was blocking it to keep someone in. "Mr. Boone," Clara said, and for the first time her voice came out soft. "Who is that crying?" Silas Boone looked at her for a long, long moment, the rifle still across his body, the blood drying on his shirt, the whole feared and rumored weight of him filling the doorway. Then he stepped aside. "Not much, just enough. You wanted to know whose blood," he said quietly. "Come look. But you keep your voice down, and you keep that gun pointed at the floor. And so help me, woman, if you scream like the rest of them and frighten her, I'll put you back on that trail myself." Clara lowered the hammer of her revolver with her thumb. Slow, careful. She stepped up onto the bloody porch, and she went inside. The cabin smelled of blood and beans and something else underneath. Fear, the old kind, the kind that soaks into wood and stays. Clara saw the boy first. He lay on a narrow cot against the far wall, no more than 12. His shirt cut away, and his shoulder packed with rags gone dark. His face was gray. His breath came shallow and quick. But it was not the boy who stopped Clara cold in the doorway. It was the child crouched in the corner beside him, a girl. 8, maybe 9. Knees drawn up to her chin, a broken doll clutched against her chest, eyes huge and white in the lamplight. She was filthy. Her hair was a snarl of straw and dust, and she was looking at Clara the way a rabbit looks at a hawk, not blinking, not breathing, every muscle in her small body wound tight to run. Clara stood very still. "Mr. Boone," she said quietly, not taking her eyes off the girl. "I thought you said the blood wasn't yours." "It ain't. It's his." She nodded at the boy. "Some of it." Silas shut the door behind her and barred it. The thud of the bar dropping made the girl flinch. "Rest of it belongs to the man who put a bullet in him. He bled some too before I was done with him." Clara turned. "Before you were done with him. He won't be troubling that boy again." Silas set the rifle in the corner, and the way he did it careful, deliberate, like a man putting down a tool. He'd be needing soon, told her more than his words. "Don't go looking at me like that. I didn't go hunting. He came up my trail in the dark, armed, asking after a little girl by name. I gave him one chance to turn around." He paused. "He didn't take it." Clara looked back at the child in the corner. "And that's her." "That's her. What's her name?" "Don't know that she's got one anymore." Silas crossed to the stove where a pot of beans had gone near to scorching and pulled it off the heat with a bare hand, like the heat was nothing. "She ain't said a word since I found her. 3 weeks now. I call her Little Bird on account of she don't sing." Clara set her parcels down slow on the table so as not to startle the girl. Then she did a thing that surprised even herself. She didn't go to the boy, though the boy was dying. She crouched down right there in the middle of the floor, 6 feet from the child, and she made herself small. "My name's Clara," she said to the girl, not to Silas. "I climbed your mountain today. It was hot enough to cook an egg on a saddle horn, and a coyote out there told me to my face I had no business here." She kept her voice low and even the way you'd gentle a green horse. "I expect you've been told the same thing, that you've got no business somewhere. I expect somebody made you believe it." The girl said nothing, but her eyes had shifted from Clara's face to Clara's hands open and empty on her knees. "I'm not going to touch you," Clara said. "I'm not going to come over there. You sit right where you are close to your friend, and you keep your doll, and you watch me. That's all. You just watch me, and you decide for yourself whether I'm one of the ones you run from." Behind her, Silas had gone still. Clara stood up. She turned her back on the girl on purpose, a deliberate offering. "I'm not afraid of you, and you needn't be afraid of me," and went to the boy on the cot. She put 2 fingers to his throat. The pulse was there, but it was fast and thin, a frightened bird's heart. "How long since you packed this?" "Couple hours. It's still bleeding through." She was already unwinding her shawl, already reaching for the brown paper parcel and tearing the string with her teeth. "I need that carbolic if you've got it. And clean water boiled not from a creek. And light. Bring that lamp closer, I can't see what I'm doing." Silas didn't move for a second. He was staring at her the way the boy's pulse beat fast, surprised, not quite trusting it. "You know doctoring. I ran a household of 40 hands for 11 years, Mr. Boone. Men fall off horses. Men get gored, get crushed, get cut. I've dug more lead out of more meat than I'd care to count, and I've buried the ones I couldn't save, and I'd thank you to bring me that lamp before this boy becomes another." She looked up at him fierce. "Now." He brought the lamp. It was past midnight when she finally sat back on her heels, her hands red to the wrist, and let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for an hour. "The ball's out," she said. "It missed the bone. He's young and he's strong, and if the wound stays clean, he'll keep that arm and his life both." She wiped her hands on a rag. "Who is he?" "Caleb." Silas had not left her side the whole time. He'd held the boy down when the probing made him cry out, held him with a gentleness that didn't match his size, murmuring low into the boy's ear the entire time. "Easy now, easy, you're all right, I've got you." Found him 3 days back, half dead in a dry wash. He'd come up looking for her. A nod at the corner. Brother and sister. Their folks had a homestead down in the canyon. Had a deed to it free and clear. Had. Huxley's men burned it. Silas said the name the way a man spits out a bad tooth. Grant Huxley owns half the cattle in the valley and wants the other half plus every acre of mountain water he can lay hands on. Folks been signing their land over to him for a year, selling cheap or just clearing out in the night. Funny thing. His jaw tightened. All of them had cabins that caught fire first. Clara went very still. The words sat between them in the lamplight. Fire. Their folks, she made herself ask, didn't get out. Silas looked at the girl who had not moved from her corner, who was watching the boy's chest rise and fall like it was the only thing in the world. She saw it, all of it. That's why she don't talk. And that's why Huxley wants her so bad he sends men up my mountain in the dark, because a burned cabin's an accident, but a child who watched it done and lived. He shook his head. That's a witness. That's a rope. He can't have her breathing. Clara sat down hard in the only chair. She thought of the Larkin barn. 80 horses. The word, arsonist, following her down the road like a stray dog. She thought of how a rich man had needed a fire to be carelessness instead of crime, and how easily, how cheaply he'd bought that lie. She had thought she was the only one. She had thought her fire was the worst thing that could happen to a person. She'd been wrong on both counts. Mr. Boone, she said slowly. The other women. The 4 before me. What did they see when they got up here? Silas looked at her. First one came the week after I pulled the girl out of the canyon. Saw a feral child and blood and a mountain man with a gun, and she ran. They all ran. I quit telling them anything after the second one. Easier to just let them go than to explain something they didn't want to hear. He leaned against the wall. Town thinks I scare 'em off. Truth is, they scare their own selves off. They come up here wanting a husband and a roof and a quiet life, and what they find is... He gestured at the cabin, the boy, the silent girl, the barred door. This, and you let them think you're mad. A madman on a mountain is a thing folks leave alone. His eyes met hers. Which is exactly what I need them to do. Long as Huxley thinks I'm just a crazy hermit, he sends one man at a time, careless in the dark. The day he figures out what I really am, that I'm the wall between him and that child he comes with 20. Clara was quiet a moment. Then she stood crossed to her parcels and began unpacking them on the table. Salt, rope, bandages, the canteen, and the cartridges, 40 of them, which she set in a neat row in the lamplight like teeth. Then I reckon, she said, you'd best stop telling people you're mad and start telling them you've got a wife. Silas stared at her. You climbed my mountain 4 hours ago, he said slowly. You watched me dig lead out of a stranger. You found out there's a child up here, a powerful man once dead, and that any soul who knows it is in his way. He shook his head. Any sense at all you'd be running down that trail right now? I've done my running, Mr. Boone. Clara lined up the last cartridge. I ran from one fire already, got blamed for it, lost everything, came all the way out here to disappear. She looked up and her eyes were dry and hard and certain. I'm done disappearing. If you've got a child up here that needs a wall between her and the wolves, then you've got 2 now instead of 1. That's the arrangement. Take it or send me down. For a long moment, Silas Boone said nothing at all. Then from the corner came a small, dry, rusty sound, the first Clara had heard from the child. The girl was holding out her broken doll. Toward Clara. Just an inch. An offering. Clara crossed the floor, slow knelt, and took it with both hands like it was made of glass. She's beautiful, she said softly. What happened to her arm? The girl said nothing. But she didn't pull away. And when Clara very gently, very carefully set the doll's broken arm back against its body and bound it with a twist of clean bandage, a tiny splint, a doctor's work for a child's heart. The girl watched every movement, and something in her small, wound-up body let go just a little. There, Clara whispered. Now she'll mend, same as your brother, same as you. The girl looked at the doll, then up at Clara. She didn't speak. But she scooted an inch at a time across the floor and leaned just barely the lightest weight in the world against Clara's side. Clara held still and let her. Above the girl's head, she met Silas's eyes. Take it, he said quietly. The arrangement. Stay. They were married 3 days later by a circuit preacher in the dusty front room of the Cedar Hollow Church, with 2 strangers as witnesses and the whole town watching through the windows. Clara wore her traveling dress, the same one she'd arrived in. There was no lace. There was no music. The preacher's voice shook a little when he got to the part about till death do you part, because everyone in that room had heard the stories, and everyone expected to be burying this one too inside a month. Clara said I do in a clear, flat voice that didn't shake at all. Outside on the church steps, the toothpick man from the mercantile bench leaned to his neighbor. $5 says she's gone by the 4th of July. Done, said the neighbor. Clara heard them both. She walked past them with her chin level and her new husband's arm under her hand, and she did not give them so much as a flicker. She had a reason now. She had 2 reasons, and a third lying wounded in a cabin up the mountain. The town could bet whatever it liked. The town didn't know the half of it. The town never would, if she had any say. For 2 weeks the mountain became a kind of life. It was not a tender one. There was too much work for tenderness. Clara was up before the light hauling water from the spring that hadn't dried, the only one for miles. She came to understand, which was its own kind of reason, Huxley wanted this particular acre. She cooked, she scrubbed. She changed Caleb's dressings twice a day and watched the gray leave his face by inches until the morning he woke up cussing and asking for bacon, and she had to turn away so the boy wouldn't see her cry over a string of profanity. She mended fence in the killing heat with her sleeves rolled up. She learned the corral horses by name. The big bay was Job, the gray mare was Patience names. Silas had given them that told her more about the man than he ever said out loud. She cleaned the rifles every evening, all of them, laying them out on the table and oiling each one, while Silas watched and slowly stopped watching the way a man stops watching a thing he's decided he can trust. And the girl followed her everywhere, not close. Always 6 feet back, the doll under her arm. But everywhere. To the spring. To the fence line. To the stove. The child watched Clara work the way some people watch the sun come up, like it was proof the world hadn't ended after all. "She's deciding," Clara told Silas one evening low, while the girl slept curled at the foot of Caleb's cot. "Whether I'm one of the ones she runs from." And Clara looked at the small sleeping shape. "I think she's decided I'm not." It was Caleb on the mend now, and propped up against the wall with a plate of beans, who finally gave them the name. "Nora," he said around a mouthful. "Her name's Nora, after our grandmother." He looked at his silent sister with eyes too old for his face. "She used to talk all the time, wouldn't hush. Pa used to say she was born with somebody else's share of words." His jaw worked. "Then she used 'em all up screaming, I reckon. That night. Ain't had any left since." Nora, hearing her own name, looked up from the floor. Clara crouched down to her level. "Nora," she said, gently trying it. "That's a good strong name, a grandmother's name." She held out her hand, palm up, not reaching, just offering. "I'm glad to finally know it." And Nora, silent, watchful, 3 weeks without a word, put her small, dirty hand in Clara's. It wasn't speech, but it was something. The peace lasted exactly until the 4th Tuesday, when 3 riders came up the trail in the white heat of midday, with badges pinned to their vests, and the slow, easy confidence of men who'd never once been told no. Clara saw the dust first. She was at the fence with a fistful of wire, and she watched the dust climb the trail, and her stomach turned to a cold stone. "Silas." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. "Riders." Howe was beside her in seconds, a hand shading his eyes. "Badges," he said softly. "Huxley's gotten bolder. He's dressing them up as law now." He turned to her, fast, urgent. "Get the children in the root cellar, now. There's a hatch under the rug by the stove. Caleb knows it. You bar it from inside, and you don't come up, not for anything, not for any voice that ain't mine, saying the word Cottonwood. You hear me?" "I hear you." "And Clara." He caught her arm. It was the first time he'd touched her since the day they'd married, and his hand was gentle, even now, even hurried. "Whatever I say to them, whatever lie I tell you, back it. Don't think, just back it." "I'm your wife," Clara said. "I know how to be your wife." She got the children down. Caleb went first, then Nora, who clung to Clara's wrist at the lip of the dark hatch with a grip like a snare, her eyes pleading, her mouth working with words that wouldn't come. "I'll be right up here," Clara whispered, prying the small fingers loose one at a time. "Right here over your head the whole time. I'm not going anywhere. I have never, not once in my life, run from a fight, and I am surely not going to start with you watching." She pressed the broken-armed doll into the girl's hands. "Hold her, she mends, so do we. Cottonwood, remember. That's the only word that means it's safe." She dropped the hatch. She heard the bar slide. She rolled the rug back over it, set a chair on top, and was standing at the stove stirring an empty pot when the 3 riders pulled up in the yard. The one in front had a wide, pale face and a badge that didn't sit right, like he'd pinned it on that morning for the first time. "Boone," he called, not getting down. "Heard a rumor you took a wife." "Heard right." Silas stood easy in the cabin door, the rifle nowhere in sight, his whole body arranged into the shape of a man with nothing to hide. "What's it to the law?" "We're looking for a runaway. Little girl, 8 or 9. Wandered off from her people, addled in the head. Dangerous to herself." The man's eyes went past Silas to the cabin, raking it. "Folks down the valley said they seen a child up this way." "Folks down the valley been calling me mad for 2 years, Silas said. "Now you're taking their word as gospel." The man's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Mind if we look around?" And that was when Clara stepped into the doorway, an apron over her dress and flour on her hands. She'd thought to dust on at the last second, and put on the brightest, emptiest, most harmless smile she had ever worn in her life, "Why, husband, where are your manners?" she said, light as air. "3 gentlemen ride all this way in this heat, and you leave them sitting in the sun." She beamed up at the riders, every inch the foolish new bride the whole town believed her to be. "You'll have to forgive him, he's not used to company. We don't get visitors. Can I bring you all some water? It's a dreadful climb. I know I near died on it myself, didn't I, Silas?" The lead rider blinked. Whatever he'd expected from the mad cowboy's cabin, it wasn't a chattering woman in an apron. "Ma'am," he said, uncertain, "we're looking for a child. A child." Clara pressed a flowery hand to her chest. "Up here, Lord, the poor thing. No, sir, there's no child up this mountain. More's the pity, I'd dearly love one, but my Silas says it's no place to raise babies, all these snakes and the dry wells and such." She laughed a silly little laugh. "Though if you should find one wandering, you send her my way. You hear I'd take in any lost lamb the good Lord sent." Under the floor, 6 feet below her smiling face, Clara could feel the children holding their breath. The lead rider looked at her a long moment, looked at Silas, looked at the cabin, the corral, the empty yard shimmering in the heat. "You won't mind if we have a look in the barn," he said. It wasn't a question. "Course not," Clara said before Silas could speak, waving her flowery hand. "Look anywhere you like. Look in my flower bin if it pleases you. Only do mind the gray mare, she kicked something terrible near took my husband's head off Tuesday last." She turned and called sweetly into the cabin at no one at the empty room. "Caleb, honey, mind you stay clear of those gentlemen's horses now." The lead rider went rigid in his saddle. Clara felt her own blood stop. "Caleb," the rider said slowly. "Who's Caleb?" And every story Clara had ever told, every lie she had ever held together, with her 2 bare hands, came down to the next 3 seconds and what her mouth could do with them. "Caleb," Clara said, and laughed, and the laugh came out so easy it surprised even her. "Why, he's my husband's hound, sir. Big ugly thing, lazy as Sunday. We named him after my late father. God forgive me, same droopy eyes." She shook her head fondly. "He's off chasing rabbits in the brush most like. You'll not catch that dog within a mile of strangers' horses. Smart enough to know his betters, which is more than I can say for some men." The lead rider held her eyes for one long second. Then he laughed too, a short, dismissive bark, the kind of laugh a man gives when he's decided a woman is exactly as foolish as he hoped. "All right, ma'am." He swung down off his horse. "We'll look in the barn and be on our way." Clara kept smiling until his back was turned. Then the smile slid off her face like water off glass, and she met Silas's eyes across the yard, and neither of them breathed. The riders went through the barn. Clara heard them boots on the boards, the rattle of the stall doors, the gray mare squealing and kicking, just exactly as advertised, which sent one of the men cursing back out into the yard with hay in his collar. They prodded the hay. They climbed to the loft. Clara stood in the doorway over the root cellar, chattering the whole time, offering water. Nobody wanted asking after their wives and their mothers, and the price of beef filling the air with so much harmless noise that a child's held breath could hide inside it. They found nothing. There was nothing in the barn to find. The lead rider came back out dusting hay off his vest, his easy confidence gone a little sour. "Obliged for your time," he said, swinging back into the saddle. He looked at Silas a moment longer than was friendly. "Town wasn't wrong about you being strange, Boone, but strange ain't against the law." He gathered his reins. "Yet." "Ride safe down that trail," Silas said. "Heat's killed better men than you." The 3 of them turned their horses and went the dust climbing behind them, and Clara stood in the doorway and waved them off with her flowery hand, until they were small, until they were gone, until the trail was empty, and the only sound was the wind and the gray mare blowing in her stall. Then her knees went just slightly, and she caught herself on the doorframe. Silas was beside her in 2 strides. "Easy, I'm fine." She wasn't quite. Her hands had started to shake now that they had nothing left to do. "I'm fine. Get the children up." He went to the rug, kicked the chair aside, hauled up the hatch. "Cottonwood," he called down soft. "It's safe. Cottonwood." Caleb came up first, blinking, and then Nora. Nora came up out of that dark hole and across the floor and hit Clara around the legs so hard it near knocked her down. the broken doll crushed between them, her whole small body shaking, her face buried in Clara's apron. Clara went down to her knees and held her. "I've got you," she whispered into the girl's hair. "You hear me? I've got you, and that's the last time you go in the dark alone. The very last time. I swear it on every fire that ever took anything from me." She pulled back and held the small face in both her hands. "You were so brave. So quiet and so brave. Braver than 3 grown men with badges, the lot of them." Nora's mouth worked. Her eyes were full and spilling, and though no word came, she nodded fierce and pressed her face back into Clara's shoulder. Over the girl's head, Silas looked down at his wife. Whatever he'd believed about her on the porch that first night, bravest fool or most dangerous woman he'd ever met, Clara could see the question had finally settled in him, and the answer had surprised him. "You lied to a federal posse," he said quietly, without blinking. "Wasn't a federal posse." Clara stood, lifting Nora with her. "Those badges were as fake as your hound dog. Real lawmen don't laugh at a woman and ride off the first time she plays dumb. Those were Huxley's men dressed up, and now they'll go down that mountain and tell him exactly what I needed them to tell him." She set her jaw. "That there's no child up here. Just a mad cowboy and his foolish chattering wife, who'd have noticed a stray dog before she'd noticed a hidden girl." Silas stared at her. "You planned that," he said. "The flower, the dog, all of it." "I had 4 hours on the trail to think," Clara said. "I don't waste time." And for the first time since she'd climbed his mountain, Silas Boone laughed, a real one, low and rough and rusty from disuse, like a door that hadn't been opened in years. But laughter is a thing. The mountain gives back slow and takes back fast. Huxley's men had ridden down with their lie just as Clara had wanted. But Grant Huxley had not built half a valley on cattle and fire by being a man who believed easy answers. The fake lawmen told him there was no child. Huxley heard instead a mad hermit who had suddenly and inconveniently acquired a wife with quick eyes and a quicker tongue on the only acre of mountain with water that hadn't dried. That was 2 problems wearing the same dress. And Grant Huxley solved his problems the way he always had. It was Caleb who saw it first 6 days later near sundown. The boy had healed enough to take the high lookout rock above the cabin, a watch they kept now in shifts, and he came scrambling down the slope, white-faced and shouting before he'd even hit level ground. "Smoke, Silas, smoke down the south pasture, and it's moving wrong, it's moving up." Silas was on his feet before the boy finished. He took the slope to the lookout in long strides. Clara right behind him, and when she reached the top and saw what Caleb had seen, the bottom dropped out of her stomach. It wasn't a cook fire. It wasn't a lightning burn. There'd been dry lightning crackling on the far ridges all afternoon, the storm that promised rain and gave none, the kind of summer storm that lights the whole world up and lets it burn. But this fire hadn't come from the sky. This fire had 3 points of origin spaced even along the dry south fence, and it was climbing the slope toward the cabin with the wind behind it fast as a running horse. "He said it," Silas said. His voice had gone flat and terrible. "Use the dry storm for cover. If the fire kills us, it's an act of God. If it don't, it drives us down the only trail there is, straight into his guns." He turned. "He's not after the ranch. He never was. He's flushing the girl." Below them in the yard, Nora had come out of the cabin. She was standing stock still, staring at the orange line climbing the mountain, the doll fallen from her hand into the dust. And on her face was a look Clara had seen exactly once before in a mirror the night the Larkin barn burned, and she understood her whole life was about to be taken from her by other men's lies. Clara went down the slope to her so fast she nearly fell. Nora, look at me. Don't look at the fire, look at me." She got down in front of the child, blocking the orange with her own body. "We are not those people. You hear me? We are not your folks, and this is not that night. This time you've got Silas, and you've got Caleb, and you've got me. And I have buried more fire than I have years, and I am telling you, we do not burn." Nora's eyes came off the flames and onto Clara's face. And then the girl did a thing she had not done in 3 weeks, and a witness's silence. She grabbed Clara's hand, and she pulled hard, urgent, dragging her toward the east side of the yard, toward the dry wash that ran down behind the corral, pointing. pointing her whole body, straining with the effort of a word she could not find. "What is it?" Clara dropped beside her. "What are you trying to tell me?" Nora pointed down the wash. Then she made a motion, flat hands layered like papers stacked. Then she pointed at the fire. Then back down the wash. And her mouth opened, and her throat worked, and the cord stood out in her small neck with the effort. "Fire," Nora said. One word, cracked and rusty, and the most beautiful sound Clara had ever heard. "Fire," the girl said again, and pointed down the wash hard certain. "Papers, in the fire, down there." For a heartbeat nobody moved. Then Silas was beside them, dropping to one knee. "Down the wash, the slot canyon, the dry one that floods in the spring." Nora nodded, fierce words spilling now in a broken rush like a dam giving way. "They put it there. The men, after our cabin. I followed them in the dark. I'm small, they didn't see. They put the papers in a hole in the canyon. All the papers ours and the Hendersons, and the ones from the family with the red dog. All the papers they took before they burned all in a box in the rock." She gulped air. "Deeds. Pa called them deeds. He said a deed was the only thing that proved a place was yours." Clara's mind went white and then clear all at once. "That's it," she breathed. "That's why he's never just killed her with a bullet from the dark. He could have a dozen times. He needs her gone, and the proof gone with her. She's the only living soul who knows where Huxley hid every deed he stole. She's not just a witness to a murder." She looked at Silas. "She's a witness to the theft. Burn the canyon, burn the girl, and there's no proof he didn't buy that whole valley fair and square." Silas was already moving. "Then the fire's not just to flush her. It's headed for that canyon to burn the box. Two birds." He grabbed his rifle off the wall, threw the lever-fed shells into it with hands that didn't fumble. "Caleb, can you ride?" "I can ride. Take Patience, ride the back ridge to the Hendersons, tell every honest family Huxley ever burned that the proof their land was stolen is in Cedar Hollow Canyon, and Grant Huxley's burning it right now. Bring them. Bring guns. Bring lanterns. Bring anybody who ever had a thing taken." He hauled the boy up by the collar, eye to eye. "Ride like the devil's on you, son, because he is." Caleb was gone in 30 seconds, low over the gray mare's neck, vanishing down the back of the ridge. Silas turned to Clara, and for one moment, the terrible flat calm cracked, and she saw underneath it, saw the fear not for himself, but for all of them. "I have to cut the herd loose before the fire reaches the corral, or they burn alive in there. Then I'm riding for that canyon to get the box before Huxley does. He'll have men on it." He pressed the rifle into her hands. "Take the high ridge above the wash. You can see the whole canyon mouth from there. If his men come for that box, you stop them. You don't let them down into that canyon, you hear me? Everything we've got, the children's land, the proof, all of it, it's in that box. And you? I'll come up the wash from below. We catch them between us." He gripped her shoulder hard. "Clara, I've watched 4 women run down this mountain. I need to know which kind you are before I ride into that smoke." Clara took the rifle. She checked the load the way he'd watched her do every night for 2 weeks. She thumbed back the hammer. "I already told you," she said. "I'm done running. Go cut your herd loose, Mr. Boone. I'll hold the ridge." "Nora." She turned to the girl who had found her voice and could not now stop, who was crying and talking all at once. "Nora, you take Caleb's place. You hide in the cellar and you bar it, and you don't come up for anyone but me or Silas. You've done your part. You found your words. Now let me do mine." But Nora shook her head wild and grabbed Clara's sleeve. "I have to show you. The box. It's hidden, you'll never find it in the smoke. There's a mark, a stone shaped like a fist. I'm the only one who saw. I have to show you." And there it was. The terrible arithmetic of it. The child was the only soul alive who knew where the box was. To save the proof, they needed the witness in the very place the killers were headed. Clara looked at Silas. Silas looked at the climbing fire. There was no time, and they both knew there was no time, and they both knew there was no good answer. "She comes with me to the ridge," Clara said. "Only the ridge. She points from up high. She never goes down into that canyon, and she stays behind me and the rifle the whole way. That's the deal, or it's no deal." "Clara, there's no other way, and you know it. You taught me I don't waste time, and I don't lie to myself." She slung the rifle, took Nora's hand. We hold the high ground. You bring the herd, and then bring yourself. And Silas. She caught his eyes one last time. Don't you dare burn up in that smoke. I have run out of patience for losing things to fire. Something passed between them then that neither had words for and neither needed. He nodded once. Then he was gone, running for the corral, and Clara heard the gate crash open and the thunder of frightened horses pouring out into the dusk, and she didn't look back. She had a ridge to climb and a child's hand in hers, and the whole weight of 4 burned families riding on her aim. The climb to the high ridge was a nightmare of heat and falling light, the smoke rolling up the slope behind them. Now the air gone thick and stinging. Nora climbed like a goat, sure-footed and silent again, but a new silence, a fighting silence, her jaw set. Twice Clara hauled her up by the arm over rock too steep for the girl's short legs. Neither of them slowed. They reached the ridge as the sun died, and below them at the mouth of the slot canyon, Clara saw the riders, 4 of them on foot, now their horses tied back from the smoke. They had lanterns. They were searching the canyon wall, searching the wrong section, 50 yards south of where Nora's small finger was pointing at a pale stone-shaped unmistakable, even from here like a closed fist. They don't know where it is, Clara breathed. They're guessing. Huxley sent them to burn it, but he never knew exactly where. You're the only one who knows, child, and they're about to give up and just burn the whole canyon and pray. One of the men below struck a match. Clara dropped to her belly on the ridge, braced the rifle on a rock, and put Nora flat behind her with one firm hand. Stay down. Stay behind me. Whatever happens, you do not stand up. She did not aim at the men. She'd buried enough to know the difference between stopping a thing and starting a worse one. She aimed at the lantern in the lead man's hand, the one with the match, the one about to set the whole canyon ablaze and burn 4 families proof to nothing. She let out her breath. The way Silas oiled his rifles, the way she did everything. Slow, certain. She fired. The lantern exploded in the man's hand in a spray of glass and burning oil, and he screamed and dropped and beat at his sleeve, and the other 3 spun, drawing firing wild up at the ridge at a shooter they couldn't see in the smoke in the dark. Clara worked the lever and fired again over their heads, this time into the rock above them, raining stone chips down, driving them back from the fist-shaped stone, back toward their horses. Back. That's it, she said through her teeth, firing again. That's it, you keep running. You came to burn children's homes in the dark. Let's see how you like being the ones who can't see. And from below, from the throat of the burning canyon, came the answer she'd been praying for and dreading, both a rifle firing up at the men from the other direction from the floor of the wash, fast and accurate and merciless. Silas. Catching them between the ridge and the canyon floor, exactly as he'd said. The 4 men were caught in the open between 2 guns they couldn't place with the fire. Climbing the canyon walls, and the smoke stealing their sight, and one by one they broke. They ran for their horses. They left the wounded man crawling, and they hauled him up, and they fled down the dark valley trail, and Clara held her fire and let them go, because she'd come to stop a fire, not to start a grave. Then the wind shifted. It came around hard out of the west, the way mountain wind does, sudden and total, and it took the fire that had been climbing toward the empty cabin and turned it all at once straight into the throat of the slot canyon. Straight at the fist-shaped stone, straight at the box, and straight at Silas Boone, who was down on the canyon floor between the flames and the proof, and who Clara watched from the high ridge, with her heart stopping in her chest, turn not away from the fire, but toward it, toward the stone, toward the box. No, Clara whispered, then screamed it into the roar and the smoke, knowing he couldn't hear, knowing it anyway. Silas, no, leave it, Silas. Below her. The fire reached the canyon mouth and roared up the walls in a wall of orange, and the man she had married 3 weeks ago, and not yet let herself love, disappeared completely into the smoke, going the wrong way, going toward the flames, going after a box of paper, as if paper were worth a life. And beside her on the ridge, Nora found Clara's hand and gripped it, and spoke for the 3rd time that day, small and certain through the smoke and the roar. He'll come back, the child said. He always comes back for what's hidden. Clara did not answer the child. There wasn't time for faith. She was already up, already moving, already shoving the rifle into Nora's small hands. Both hands, like I showed you. You stay on this ridge and you do not come down, not for anything, not even for me. You hear me, Nora? Not even for me. Where are you? To get him. Clara was already over the lip of the ridge, sliding down the loose slope toward the smoke on her heels and her palms. Because he's a stubborn fool who'd die for a box of paper, and somebody's got to teach him paper isn't worth a man. She hit the canyon floor in a cloud of dust and ash, and the heat took her breath like a fist. The smoke was a living thing down here, thick and gray and clawing. She pulled her shawl up over her mouth and went forward into it toward where she'd last seen him, toward the fist-shaped stone, calling his name into a roar that swallowed it whole. Silas Boone. Nothing. Just the fire eating the dry brush along the walls, climbing, closing the canyon mouth behind her like a door. She'd run from one fire in her life. She'd let men's lies push her down a road with the word arsonist barking at her heels, and she'd told herself she was through running. Now here she was running again, but toward the fire this time, into it, and the difference was everything. Silas. And then she saw him. How was down. On one knee at the base of the fist-shaped stone, an iron box clutched against his chest, and a fallen burning brace of brush pinning his leg to the rock. He was beating at it with his free hand, but the fire had him, and the smoke had him, and his head was sagging. Clara crossed the last 20 feet without feeling her own legs. You stupid stubborn! She hauled the burning brush off his leg with her bare hands, felt the heat sear her palms, and did not stop, did not even slow. You went toward it. You went toward the fire, after everything. The box. His voice was a wreck, all smoke. It's everything. Their land. You're everything, you fool. She got under his arm, hauled him up, and the weight of him nearly took her down. Their land isn't worth your life. Nothing is worth. She coughed, doubled, dragged him a step. Don't you dare make that child watch a man burn. Don't you dare. Walk. Lean on me and walk. And Silas Boone feared, rumored, the mad cowboy of the mountain, a man twice her size, who had carried wounded children up this slope alone, leaned on his wife and walked. They came out of the smoke at the canyon mouth half blind and choking, the box still in Silas's arms, because he would not even now let it go. They collapsed together against the cool rock outside the fire's reach, and Clara held him, both of them, coughing the smoke out of their lungs in great heaving gulps, and above them on the ridge, a small figure stood with a rifle too big for her, and watched them live. Told you, Silas rasped when he could speak. Came back. You came back because I dragged you back. Same thing. His head fell against her shoulder, and his next words came so quiet she barely caught them over the fire. Nobody ever came after me before, Clara. My whole life. Nobody ever once came back into the fire. Clara held him tighter and did not trust her voice to answer. They were still sitting there, ash-streaked and clinging together, when the lanterns came. A whole line of them bobbing up the dark valley trail, and for one cold instant, Clara's hand went for the rifle that wasn't there, certain it was Huxley, certain he'd come with the 20 men Silas always said he would. Then she heard the boy's voice, high and cracking and triumphant, leading them up. There they are. Silas, Caleb, on the gray mare, and behind him on foot and on horseback came the families, the Hendersons, the family with the red dog, old men and young wives and half-grown boys, 20-30 of them, and more coming, every soul. Grant Huxley had ever burned or bullied or run off their land in the night, and they had come up the mountain with lanterns and rifles, and the particular hard quiet of people who have been wronged for a long time, and have finally been given somewhere to point it. A broad woman in widow's black got down off a mule and walked straight to Silas and looked at the iron box in his arms. That what I think it is? Her voice shook. My Tom signed our place over to Huxley the week before they found him dead in the creek. Drowned, they said. In a creek that ain't run since April. Her jaw worked. Is our deed in that box, Mr. Boone, is the real one? Silas, too spent to stand, held up the box. Open it and see. She knelt. She worked the latch with shaking hands. And inside, packed tight and scorched at one corner but whole were the deeds. Dozens of them. Every stolen acre in the valley. The original deeds that proved the land had never been sold at all. Only taken, only burned around, only stolen from the dead and the frightened and the runoff. The widow lifted one out. She read the name on it, and she put her face in her hands and wept right there in the ash, the way a person weeps when something they'd given up for lost is handed back. "It's real," she said. "It's the real one. He never bought my land. He took it. Here's the proof he took it." She looked up and her wet eyes had gone to flint. "There's a stack of these. Every family he ruined. It's all here." And one by one, the families came forward to the box, and one by one, they found their names, their stolen land, the proof of the lie that had cost them everything. And a sound went through that crowd on the dark mountain that Clara would never forget, as long as she lived, not cheering nothing so easy as that. A low rolling murmur of fury and grief, and something that had been buried so long it had near forgotten its own name. Justice. The crowd had found its way to justice, and it had teeth. Grant Huxley was at his ranch when they came for him. He was a heavy, well-fed man in a clean shirt, and he met the crowd on his own porch, the way such men always do, with the easy confidence of someone who has never once been told no, who believes the law and the money, and the long arm of his own importance will protect him as they always have. "What's the meaning of this?" he said, looking out at the lanterns, the rifles, the burned and stolen families filling his yard. "It's the middle of the night. You're trespassing. I'll have the law on every one of you." "You're welcome to," said Silas Boone. He came up the porch steps, slow, leaning on a stick, his leg bound where the fire had taken it, the iron box under his other arm. Clara was beside him. Nora was between them, holding both their hands, no longer silent, no longer hidden. And behind them stood 30 families with the proof in their hands and the fury in their faces. Huxley's eyes went to the box. And for the first time in his life, something moved in that fat, confident face that looked like fear. "That's not—" He stopped, recovered. "Whatever that is, it's mine. You've stolen it off my property. That's theft, and I'll see you hang for its deeds." Silas set the box on the porch rail. "Every deed you took before you burned the cabins, the originals, the ones that proved not 1 acre of this valley was ever sold to you fair." He opened it. "You're a careful man, Huxley, too careful to destroy proof you might someday need to forge against. So you kept them, hid them in a canyon, and meant to burn them tonight, along with the only witness who knew where they were." He looked down at Nora. Huxley's eyes went to the child. And Nora, who 3 weeks ago could not say her own name, who had watched this man's hired men burn her family alive, looked back at Grant Huxley and did not flinch. "You burned my house," Nora said, clear, steady, the voice of a witness. "I saw you. You weren't there, but your men were, and they said your name. They said Mr. Huxley wants the deed and don't leave the girl. And then they burned it with my ma and pa inside." Her small hand tightened in Clara's. "I followed your men in the dark. I watched them hide the box. I'm the one who told. Me." The yard had gone dead silent. Huxley's face had gone the color of old tallow. "She's a child," he said, but his voice had cracked down the middle. "An addled child. No court would take the word of— No court needs to take only her word." A new voice, a lean man stepping out of the crowd, a real badge on his vest. The genuine article summoned down from the territorial seat by a rider Caleb had sent in the night. The marshal had come because 30 sworn families and a box of original deeds was a thing no real lawman could ignore. "We've got the deeds, Mr. Huxley. We've got 30 families who'll swear they never sold. We've got a dead man in a dry creek and another fresh grave up that mountain where your men met Mr. Boone. And we've got a witness." He looked at Nora. "A clear-spoken one, seems to me." His hand went to his cuffs. "That's a sight more than I need." Huxley broke then. The way they all break the careful, confident men when the lie finally outweighs them. He lunged not at the marshal, not at Silas, but at the box on the rail, one last animal grab at the proof, as if destroying the paper could unmake the truth. He never reached it. Clara stepped in front of the box. She didn't draw a gun. She didn't raise a hand. She just stood there, square and unmoving between Grant Huxley and the proof of everything he'd done, and looked up into his face with the same flat, certain eyes she'd turned on a whole town that laughed at her. "No," she said, "just that. You've taken your last thing, Mr. Huxley. And Huxley, twice her size, ruined and raging, stopped. Because there are women a man can frighten, and women a man cannot. And he saw too late exactly which kind had walked up his porch steps. The marshal took him by the arms. The cuffs went on, and Grant Huxley was led down off his own porch through a yard full of the people he'd burned, who did not cheer, who did not throw stones, who only watched him go with the terrible patient quiet of justice that has waited a long, long time. It was near dawn when they brought the truth back down to Cedar Hollow. The whole town had turned out, woken by the riders, the lanterns, the news running door to door like the fire on the mountain. They stood on their porches and in the dusty street. The same people who had laughed when Clara bought her cartridges, who had bet $5 she'd run by the 4th of July, who had called Silas Boone mad for 2 long years. The toothpick man from the mercantile bench was there. He'd lost his bet and he knew it. Clara walked down the center of the street with the dawn coming up behind her, ash still in her hair, her burned hands bound in clean cloth, Silas limping at her side, and Nora and Caleb walking ahead of them, and the whole town watched the mad cowboy and his foolish bride come down the mountain, not dead, not broken, not running, but with the marshal behind them, and Grant Huxley in chains, and 30 wronged families bearing witness. The shopkeeper came out from behind his counter and stood in his doorway. The same man who'd warned her, who'd counted out her cartridges with shaking hands. "Ma'am," he said. And then, because that wasn't enough, "Mrs. Boone, He stopped. His eyes went to her bandaged hands, to the limping man beside her, to the child who walked unafraid down the middle of a street full of strangers. "We had you all wrong, the both of you. The whole lot of us did." Clara stopped in front of him. She could have said a great many things. She had earned the right to say them, to throw their laughter back, their bets, their cruelty. The word they'd hung on Silas, and the word that had once been hung on her. Arsonist. Mad. Run by sundown. She looked at the gathered town, at all the faces that had turned away when she needed them, and turned out now that the danger was past. "You had us wrong," Clara agreed, quiet. "But I'll tell you what you had right. You said that mountain was no place for a soft woman or a sane man." She almost smiled. "Turns out it wasn't. It was a place for a stubborn one, and a kind one, and a child who needed both." She looked down at Nora, then back up. "You bet I'd run. I understand the impulse. This whole town's been running from that mountain for 2 years, telling itself a story about a madman, so it wouldn't have to ask what he was really guarding up there, or who." A long silence in the street. "We didn't know," someone said low. "You didn't ask," Clara said. "Not cruel, just true. That's the thing about a story everybody finds easy to believe. Nobody has to look behind it. The town found it easier to call Silas Boone mad than to wonder why a man would live alone on a dry mountain with a rifle and never come down. The town found it easier to laugh at a bride than to ask why a woman with good sense would climb up there carrying cartridges instead of lace. She shook her head. Easy stories cost somebody friend. They near cost these children everything. She did not raise her voice. She did not have to. And one by one, down the length of that dusty street, the people of Cedar Hollow lowered their eyes. Not because they were forced to, because they were ashamed, the honest ones among them. And shame is the beginning of a town learning better. Silas put his hand on Clara's shoulder. "That's enough," he said gently. "They hear you." "I reckon they do." The toothpick man stepped forward off the boardwalk. He dug in his vest, pulled out a folded $5 note, and held it out not to Clara, but to Nora. "Lost a bet," he said gruffly, not quite able to meet the child's eyes. "Bet your ma here'd run by the 4th. She didn't. Reckon the money ought to go to somebody who never had any quit in 'em to begin with." He pressed it into Nora's hand. "For your doll. Buy her a new arm." Nora looked at the money, then up at the man. "Her arm's fixed," the girl said. "Clara fixed it. She fixes broken things." A pause. "But thank you." And something in that hard old face came apart just a little, the way the shopkeepers had, the way the whole town slowly would. They did not stay in town. They had a mountain to get back to, a herd scattered across the slopes to gather, a canyon still smoking, a cabin that had, by the grace of a wind that turned at the last possible second, survived. But before they climbed back up, Clara stood a moment at the foot of the trail, where 3 weeks ago, a coyote had told her to her face she had no business here. Caleb stood beside her, the deeds to his family's land folded in his shirt against his heart. He was 16 and had buried his parents and taken a bullet and ridden through the night to bring an army of the wronged up a burning mountain, and he looked in the dawn light like a man. "What happens to us now?" he asked. Not afraid, just asking. "Me and Nora. We got the deed back. We got the land. But it's just the two of us, and I—" His voice caught. "I don't know how to be enough for her. I'm not enough." Clara looked at him a long moment. Then she looked up the trail at the mountain going gold in the morning, at Silas waiting with the horses, and Nora already mounted up in front of him, small and certain and unafraid. "You're not just the two of you," Clara said. "You haven't been since the night I climbed that trail and found your blood on a stranger's porch." She put her bound hand on the boy's shoulder. "That land is yours, Caleb. Yours and Nora's, free and clear the way your folks meant it. But a deed proves where a person belongs. It doesn't make a home." She looked up the mountain again. "Home's something you build with whoever climbs the trail and doesn't run." Caleb looked up at her. "And you didn't run." "No," Clara said. "I surely did not." She started up the trail toward the mountain, toward the man and the child, and the smoking canyon, and the whole hard, beautiful life she had climbed up to find without knowing she was looking for it. And behind her, the town of Cedar Hollow watched the Boones go home. Not a madman and a runaway bride. Not a story anyone found easy anymore, but a family climbing together toward a mountain that had finally, after all this time, learned what it was for. The mountain did not forgive easy, and neither did summer. The fire had taken the south pasture, the lower fence, and a good stand of timber that had stood longer than the territory had a name. For 3 weeks the Boones worked from before light to after dark, gathering the scattered herd off the slopes, one frightened animal at a time, rebuilding fence in the killing heat, hauling charred brush, clearing the canyon where the iron box had nearly become a tomb. Clara's burned hands healed slow and scarred, and she did not baby them. She worked through the pain the way she'd worked through everything, and Silas watched her do it and said nothing, because he'd learned that to offer his stubborn wife mercy she hadn't asked for was to insult her. But the work was different now. That was the thing none of them said out loud. Before, the mountain had been a fortress, a thing to hide behind a wall against the world. Now it was a home, and a home is a thing you build for something, not just against it. Caleb worked the fence beside Silas and learned the land that was his and Nora's by right, and slept in the cabin and called Silas by his first name. And then one evening, without seeming to notice he'd done it, didn't call him anything at all, just hey, and over here, and pass me that. The easy wordless shorthand of family. And Nora talked. Lord, how the child talked once the dam broke. Caleb had said she'd been born with somebody else's share of words, and it turned out to be true. She talked to the horses. She talked to her mended doll. She talked to Clara through every chore, a running river of questions and observations, and small fierce opinions, 3 weeks of silence pouring out all at once. The first night she laughed, really laughed at something foolish Caleb did with a bucket. Clara had to leave the room because the sound of it broke something open in her that she hadn't known was still closed. She found Silas out by the corral in the dark. "She laughed," Clara said. "I heard." Clara stood beside him at the rail. The two of them had not spoken much in the weeks since the fire about what had happened in that canyon. About nobody ever came back into the fire for me. About you're everything, you fool. There had been too much work, and they were neither of them the kind to go reaching for words when there was fence to mend. But the words were there, banked like coals, and they both knew it. "That first night," Silas said after a while, "on the porch, I told you if you came looking for a husband to turn around, if you came running from wolves to step inside." He turned the worn brim of his hat in his hands. "I had it figured one way or the other, husband or wolves. Never reckoned a person might be running toward the wolves on purpose, to stand between them and somebody smaller." "I didn't reckon it either," Clara said, "until I did it." "Why'd you stay, Clara, truly? You could have walked. After the riders, after the fire, after Huxley, you got that boy his land. You could have taken a clear conscience down that trail and started fresh anywhere. Why'd you stay on a burned mountain with a lamed-up cowboy and 2 orphans that ain't even yours? Clara was quiet a long moment. 11 years, I ran a house that wasn't mine, she finally said. 11 years, I kept other people's keys raised. Other people's standing made a home for a family that threw me out the first time it was convenient. And when the fire came and they needed somebody to blame, I learned what I'd been to them the whole time. A useful thing, not a belonging one. She looked out at the dark slopes. I came up this mountain to disappear Silas. I told myself I was being practical. But the truth is, I'd stopped believing I was the kind of thing a person keeps. The kind a person comes back into the fire for. Silas turned to look at her. And then I found out I was wrong, Clara said. About myself. About what I was worth keeping. A silent child handed me a broken doll, and a feared man let me past his door, and somewhere in 3 weeks of beans and bandages and bald-faced lying to a fake posse. I quit being a useful thing and started being a belonging one. Her voice didn't shake, but it came close. That's why I stayed. Because for the first time in my life, somebody came back into the fire. And I'll be hanged if I'll ever walk away from the only place that ever did. For a long moment, Silas Boone didn't say anything at all. Then he reached over in the dark and took her scarred hand in his. Careful of the healing burns. Careful. The way he was careful with wounded boys and broken children and skittish horses, and he held it, and he didn't let go. I'm not good with saying things, he said low. Never have been. But I want it said once plain so there's no mistaking it. He turned her hand over in his. I didn't marry you to scare off the town or hide the girl better. Somewhere in there it stopped being an arrangement. I don't know the day, but there was a day. He met her eyes. You're not a useful thing to me, Clara Boone. You're the thing I'd come back into any fire there is to get. And I reckon I proved it the wrong way round going toward the flames after a box when the truth is, I'd have gone after you. Clara, who had not cried when they fired her. Who had not cried when the word arsonist followed her down the road. Who had not cried climbing a coyote. Haunted mountain alone in the dark. Clara cried then. And Silas held her while she did out by the corral in the dark. 2 stubborn, scarred people who had found late, and the hard way, the one thing neither had believed they'd get to keep. The trouble when it came from the bottom of the mountain. It was high summer when the first of them appeared on the trail. A thin woman in a worn dress, a baby on her hip, and a boy of 5 clinging to her skirt, climbing slow in the heat. Caleb saw her from the lookout and called down, and the whole family came out wary, because nobody climbed that trail by accident. The woman stopped at the edge of the yard, exactly where Clara had stopped 3 weeks before her whole life changed. She was shaking, and not from the climb. They told me down in town, she said, that there's a woman up here who don't turn folks away. Her chin trembled. My man died in the spring. Fever. And the bank's taking the place, and I got nowhere at all. And somebody said, there's a mountain where a body can... She couldn't finish. She just stood there with her babies and her shame the way a person stands when they've climbed their last hope and found a stranger's yard at the top of it. Clara walked across the yard. She did not ask the woman's story. She did not ask for proof or promises or a reason. She had stood in that exact spot, with that exact shame, and she knew that the cruelest thing you could do to a person who'd climbed their last hope was make them earn the top of the trail. What's your name? Clara asked. Ruth Calloway. Well, Ruth Calloway. Clara took the baby off her hip easy, like she'd been doing it all her life. You picked a poor time to climb a mountain in the heat. Come inside before you cook. There's beans and there's water that hasn't dried, and there's a loft that's dry and a barn that's sound. We'll figure the rest tomorrow when you've slept and your boys eaten. She turned to lead her in. Up here we don't ask folks to be worth keeping before we keep them. We learned better than that. The hard way, like most things worth learning. Ruth Calloway stood frozen a moment. Then she put her face in her free hand and wept the same way the widow in the canyon had wept the way a person weeps when they'd given up on the world being kind and the world turns out kind anyway. She was the first. She was not the last. They came all summer and into the fall. Word ran down off that mountain and through the whole territory the way word does not. The old word, mad cowboy, runaway bride, run by sundown, but a new word, a true one. There's a place up Cedar Hollow way. They don't turn folks off. A widow and orphan, a man broke by powerful men, and run off his own land. They take you in, and they don't ask you to earn it first. The widows came. The orphans came. The honest riders pushed off their spreads by the next Grant Huxley down the line. And there was always a next one came up the trail with everything they owned in a saddlebag. Caleb, who knew the bottom of despair, met each one at the lookout and walked them down to the yard himself. Nora, who had been the most broken thing on that mountain, became its fiercest welcomer, dragging each frightened child by the hand to show them the horses, the mended doll, the proof that broken things mend. And the mountain that had been a fortress became something the territory had no name for and badly needed. It was not easy. Nothing on that mountain ever was. There were lean weeks and hard winters coming, and more mouths than the herd could always feed. And Clara and Silas argued about it, sometimes low and sharp, the way married people do about whether they could take one more feed, one more hold, one more. But they always could. They always did. Because Clara had learned climbing that trail with her cartridges and her shame exactly what it cost a person to be turned away at the top of their last hope, and she had sworn on every fire that ever took anything from her that no one who climbed her trail would be turned back down it alone. The reckoning with Cedar Hollow came in the fall, and it came quiet. Grant Huxley was tried at the territorial seat, and the deeds and the 30 families and a clear-spoken child sent him to the territorial prison for the rest of his natural life, and his cattle and his stolen acres were given back to the people he'd burned. The fake lawmen scattered like roaches when the light came on. And Cedar Hollow, the town that had laughed, that had bet, that had found it easier to call a man mad than to ask what he guarded. Cedar Hollow had to live with what it had nearly let happen. A town can do that two ways. It can harden into its shame and hate the people who showed it the truth. Or it can learn. Cedar Hollow learned. Slow and grudging at first, the way towns do. But the shopkeeper started sending surplus up the mountain, flour gone a little old, but sound and dry goods that wouldn't sell anyhow, no sense letting it rot. The toothpick man, who turned out to be a fair carpenter when he wasn't betting against widows, came up one cool morning with a wagon of lumber and built without being asked and without taking a dime. A second cabin for the families that kept coming. He never spoke much about why. He just hammered all that fall, and once Clara caught him watching Nora chase the other children through the yard with a look on his hard old face like a man watching something he'd nearly helped destroy. "She talks now," he said gruffly, catching Clara watching him. "The little one. Couldn't say boo when you first come way I heard it." "She couldn't," Clara agreed. "Funny thing about a town." He drove a nail. "We all knew something was wrong up here. Knew it for 2 years. Found it easier to make up a story than to climb the trail and look." He drove another. "Easier to laugh at you than to ask why you'd want them cartridges." He set down the hammer and looked at her, and his eyes were old and clear. "We near let a man steal a whole valley and burn the children that knew it on account of we'd rather tell ourselves an easy lie than do a hard thing. That's a hard thing to live with, Mrs. Boone." "It is," Clara said. She didn't soften it. "But you're up here driving nails for orphans instead of telling stories down in town. That's the difference between a town that learned and one that didn't." The old man nodded slow, picked the hammer back up. "Reckon so," he said, and he kept building. There was one more thing before the snow came. It was Nora's doing. She'd been carrying it around for days, a folded scrap of paper, and one evening she climbed up into Clara's lap, too big for it now, near 10 and all elbows, but she did it anyway, and Clara let her and put the paper in her hands. It was a drawing. 3 big figures and a smaller one, and a baby, all stick-limbed and lopsided, standing outside a cabin under a sun with too many rays. A big broad figure with a hat that had to be Silas. A boy that had to be Caleb. A woman with a long line of hair that had to be Clara. And a small figure between them all holding a doll with one arm splinted that was unmistakably Nora herself. And there were other small figures too, off to the side, the Cowboy boy, the children who kept coming. A whole scraggle of stick figures filling the page edge to edge more than the paper could rightly hold. And underneath it, in a child's careful hard-won letters, The letters of a girl who'd had to learn her words twice, once as a baby, and once again after grief stole them a single word. Home. Clara looked at it a long time. Nora, she said, and her voice wasn't quite steady. This is the finest thing anybody's ever given me. It's not done. Nora took it back, frowning at it with an artist's seriousness. There's not enough room. They keep coming, and I keep having to draw smaller. She looked up. Is that all right? That they keep coming? Clara pulled the child against her and held her, this girl who had climbed up out of a root cellar and a burned cabin, and 3 weeks of silence to become the loudest, fiercest, most welcoming soul on the whole mountain. That's exactly all right, Clara said. You draw 'em as small as you have to. You leave room for every last one, because that's what this mountain's for now. She kissed the top of the child's head. It took us all the long way round to find it out. But that's what it was always for. Years later, when the territory had become a state, and the trail up Cedar Hollow had been widened into a road, folks who didn't know better would ask about the place on the mountain, the one with the dozen cabins and the children always running, and the old scarred woman who ran it with her big quiet husband at her side until they were both gray. The new folks asked the same wrong questions the old town had. Wasn't there some story about that woman came up as a mail-order bride, didn't she? And the man folks used to call him mad, didn't they? And the ones who'd been there, the Callaways and the Hendersons, and the dozens of grown men and women who'd once climbed that trail as broken children would set them straight. The town had sent Clara Whitmore up that mountain to disappear. They'd bet she'd run by the 4th of July. They'd called her husband mad and laughed when she bought her cartridges instead of lace, certain they were watching a foolish woman climb to her ruin. They were wrong about every last bit of it. She didn't disappear, she didn't run, and she didn't ruin. She climbed a mountain that the whole world had been afraid of, and she found a feared man guarding a broken child, and instead of fleeing, she stepped through the door, and she turned a fortress into a refuge, a madman into a husband, a silent orphan into the loudest joy on the mountain, and a town's easy cruelty into something slower and harder and far more worth having. The town had sent Clara Whitmore up the mountain to vanish. Instead, she became the reason that Broken Mountain finally learned how to protect the broken, and it never once forgot the lesson again.